Hello, this is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune. In this video, we'll address one of those day-to-day occurrences that tend to reveal to us something that is of a far deeper and far wider scope than day-to-day politics. We'll talk about Facebook post, believe it or not. And this is a Facebook post by a girl named Greta Thunberg. Now, Greta Thunberg is, how I hate Wikipedia, but I will use it here. She's a Swedish girl, now 16, whom you might have noticed in the context of addressing the World Economic Forum at Davos in the name of the children of the world, asking to stop the climate change, quote unquote, climate change, whatever the hell that means now. In that respect, she is just continuing the tradition, because in 1992 at the Rio Summit, where some of the benchmark documents of sustainable development were put forward, the same role was played by Seven Suzuki, daughter of one David Suzuki, promoter, Canadian-Japanese promoter of the global warming. It was global warming at that time, with the same lines of we have to act now because in 6 years we are all dead. Of course, we are all here. Nothing substantially different happened, but the whole story about climate being our enemy and humans being able to screw up climate to such an extent that they are that climate of the whole planet depends mainly on humans is something that is very, very hard to believe now, even for the true believers. And I say true believers because this is mainly a secular religion. But we won't talk about that now. We'll talk about poor Greta herself and the tendency she displays. This child was made into a public person, and her Facebook profile has this designation, public person, which is, in my opinion, in itself something that is very detrimental to the well-being of this young girl. Nevertheless, Greta says, or Greta's copywriter says, today is hashtag Autism Awareness Day. We are talking about April the 1st. Proud to be on the spectrum. Now, spectrum is obviously autistic spectrum, the word that covers the whole lot of symptoms. I remember autism being rather strictly defined disease. Now, a lot of things go under autism, and it's called autism spectrum. And no, autism as well as ADHD, ADD, Tourette's, OCD, ODD, etc., different maladies, is not a gift. Surely it's not. For most, it is an endless fight against schools, workplaces, and bullies. But under the right circumstances, given the right adjustments, it can be a superpower. I've had my fair share of depressions, alienation, anxiety, and disorders. But without my diagnosis, I would never have started school striking, because then I would have been like everyone else. Our societies need to change, and we need people who think outside the box, and we need to start taking care of each other and embrace our differences. Hashtag ASPI power, Asperger's syndrome power, or hashtag autism. Now, what's wrong with this? Everything. We won't go into comments, because comments are also as wrong as it gets. Because this girl can have this, we can give her a benefit of doubt because she's so young and unformed personality, and she's mentally mentally disabled to some extent. Because autism, whatever it is on this autism spectrum, is surely not a gift. But it surely isn't a superpower. What we have in this Facebook post is a glorification of a new standard for children, for youth, adolescents. And that is to say, be proud of your malady. Be proud of what's wrong with you. And taking something that is wrong, something that is not normal, that is in fact a disease, and stepping out of the boundaries of the health as a standard and benchmark for health, for right social awareness, let's call it. Now, this school strike mentioned in this post, which I don't believe was written by this girl, but never mind. I hope it's not. I hope that she's not indoctrinated in this kind of thinking. A school strike was, let's say, globe-wide protest of high school kids against quote-unquote climate change. Now, to say just what amount of kids gives an F for so-called climate change, I won't even go into it. This was organized protest. This is something that communists did when they were in power in some of our Eastern European countries, where you have spontaneous children protest against something, or when some kind of policy or ideological course, better to say, is to be pushed forward. The best thing to do is to use masses of people, sometimes workers, sometimes people, sometimes women, sometimes combination thereof, to ask the leaders to do something about it. Of course, everything is orchestrated by the leaders themselves, and it is completely obvious, because these things don't. If we are talking about strike against power, against establishment, it is not something that its establishment will support, and that haven't changed. But what is extremely disturbing in this is that this is the call to us be power, to claim the power of autism. There is no power in mental disability. Not to use some harsher words, because I like children, and I can't work myself into being cynical about 16 years old, but I am very cynical about those who promote these things, and I'm extremely cynical about those who fall for this. What astonishes me is that a whole bunch of people take this as normal. And this is, in my opinion, a result of a long process of normalizing what is not normal. Now, granted, this girl is not individually guilty for her condition. If indeed she has this condition, we don't know. That's something that is said about her, but these personages that go into public circulation, you can't really be sure what kind of life they lead and how they are in reality. This is just the peak of the iceberg. It is very similar to a principle when transgender individuals, in some parts, here where I live, also called freaks, pretty unapologetically, acquire the right to use women's bathrooms and to be sent to women's prisons. And when people en masse acclaim this as with a sentence, love has won, this is the abnormality that was burrowing in people's mind for at least 20 years. This is not out of the blue, because in 1991, Severn Suzuki could sell this story more or less through CNN, who was the main promoter of the Rio Summit, but Severn Suzuki was understood as a very young, passionate activist with extremely good grades at school, good looking, healthy, and so on. Now they are using a girl who is everything but healthy, because autism is a severe malady, and it is a cross to bear for any family. Now, I know people with autistic children, that is the children that are put into the framework of diagnosis autistic spectrum, and I know what kind of cross this is for them. And some of those people may be tempted to take this as something good, as something that makes them feel better, and makes somebody like me, who criticize this for seeing this monstrosity for what it is, can put us on trajectory of conflict, which is very devious. Because when you start criticizing these things, the first impression of people who are not aware of the implications, who are not thinking clearly but sentimentally about this, is that you are cruel. But the thing is, this has nothing to do with cruelty, at least from the side of individual who criticizes this misuse of child as a poster face and misuse of her disease. Cruelty is precisely that you use the child that is sick, and sick in a very serious way, to be a benchmark for other kids her age, making this the benchmark of normalcy. The other example could be, for instance, children with Down syndrome that are sometimes promoted as standard of beauty. Now, a child with a Down syndrome is anything but a standard of beauty, and this is simply a reality. The interesting and devious thing is that you can bet all money you got on the fact that somebody promoting beauty, Down syndrome beauty standard, is also in favor of the free access to abortion. And abortion is mostly delivered for wanton reasons, for simply not accepting the consequences of having sex. But some reasons are the fear of parents or mother, to be more precise, that she will not be able to provide her child with what they called quality life. And one of those things is when child is diagnosed, the fetus is diagnosed that will have a Down syndrome. So we have, as those who follow Focali Tribune know, we had podcast, Didre and I, about those who advocate in academic circles, openly advocate infanticide, because they advocate for killing Down syndrome child, for instance, to some age. The age would be before Down syndrome child is able to make rational choices about his or her well-being. Now, to define this age is pretty much impossible, especially with people who have some kind of mental syndrome, because you can always say that they are not in fact able. They have a self-consciousness that is not making them a proper person. So this goes together. This sentimental Saharan sentimentality, when they call this girl smart and beautiful and real leader, although she is by her very condition unfortunately prevented from not only being a leader, from leading a normal life. And this sentence I just pronounced is a huge taboo. It is impossible to be in some sense unequal today. That is to say, it is impossible to have a destiny that is such that can be even tragic. Yet in reality, this is a mainstay of life, and not only in the circumstances of the serious mental disease as autism or mental dysfunction, brain dysfunction to be more precise, or neurological dysfunction. But in all kinds of circumstances, there is always a wall that we have to cross. It is in our nature that we have to cross it, and we are unable to cross it. This is what is called tragedy, to be guilty without guilt. But this is the mainstay of human life. This is what is, everything is based on the recognition that this is something with which we have to live. Now, I wouldn't be going too far and saying that this is the only aspect of life, that life is in essence tragedy, because I'm talking from a standpoint of a Christian civilization to which I belong and which I was born and I will die in. Even if it crumbles all around me, I will not desert it. And this tradition, and we in the West don't know much of any other tradition, believe it or not, but we know about its inversion very much now, because this is its inversion. In this tradition, the tragedy is not such a tragedy. It is able to, there is a meaning, there could be a meaning to it. Now, this is not giving the meaning or overcoming the malady. This is taking the bad to be the benchmark of good. And the only thing that prevents people from realizing this, it's because it is cushioned in sentimentality, because they are rooting for the girl. But they are in fact rooting for establishment. She's supposedly in conflict with, she is not. If they call you, imagine somebody inviting me to speak on Davos conference. Not gonna happen. Not that I would be, not that I think that my refutations of epistemological presupposition of this climate disaster, apocalyptic cult and such things would resonate. I don't think it would. I don't think I'm that good and that strong intellectually. But what I have to say is anti-establishment. What this girl has to say is absolutely pro-establishment. So let us not be made idiots and fall for this. Now, if you work in schools, you are obliged to provide children with their day of strike against so-called climate change, and you have to instruct them on the virtues of sustainable development. Luckily, in countries such as mine, teacher can tell them what sustainable development really is and why the population or reduction of human population, of in fact preventing people to be born or killed off at birth, is the mainstay and the fundamental reason why sustainable development as a doctrine exists. And you have a bunch of kids who are very open to appreciating the arguments explaining this, because this is very hard to debate once you go into it, when you read documents and when you demonstrate from the practical politics that is being implemented, for instance, in Europe for now very long time, and is an official doctrine of European Union. But this is there is one more level to this, and this is this deeper psychological level where you get to make your malady a benchmark of normalcy. Make homosexual marriage, which is not marriage, which is defying definition of marriage. Not only Christian, but only Christian interests us here, because we live in a Christian world. No matter that this world is inverted with secularization in certain areas, but any marriage, because this is homosexuality, as we all already talked about. Kali Tribune is identitarian sexuality. It defies the idea of sex, of uniting of differences. And what is interesting, it is sold to everybody together with a stamp with the label of diversity or acceptance of difference. Homosexuality, for instance, is not, I'm digressing just a little bit, it's not about difference, it's about identity, because homosexual drives a expression of the fundamental rejection of difference, because you cannot be even attracted to the opposite sex. And opposite sex in human life is the main difference you discover as a grown-up person. This is the hallmark of adolescence, this waking of sexuality and the attempt to bridge the gap between you and the other, because it's not anymore you and your mother and your father and your brother and your sister, and in the ideal sense or in the normal sense, let's say, in the benchmark sense of happy family. Now you are going in the wild world among the differences, and the main difference is that girl opposite to you or that boy opposite to you. And boys are, by the way, always at a disadvantage, because they grow up biologically and psychologically, I think 3 to 4 years later. So they are always at disadvantage in maturity towards girls. This is how you discover diversity. Praising homosexuality is an attack of the very fundamental anthropological diversity by its very definition. And this is not something that is very difficult to realize under a condition that you are not bespelled or bedazzled by the sentimentality and people who comment on this girl, most of them, for what she has to say about her autism as her power, are completely overwhelmed by sentimentality. And when people are overwhelmed about sentimentality, about some supposed good cause, to which they don't have to invest anything, because striking in school will not get you into conflict with anybody, because this is establishment order. This is directive. You feel good about yourself without having to pay for it. For instance, if you, in extreme case, want to buy off all the sins of humankind and they nail you to a cross, well, you have a good reasons to feel good about yourself. And I think that God-man does feel good about himself, but you have to pay a rather hefty price for this act of defiance to evil, or setting things right. Now, this is the opposite. This is complete opposite, but it is disguised in a very fair hue. And sentimentality gives you this feeling good about yourself. Doing good does not have to be connected, and indeed should not be motivated by feeling good about yourself. And doing good has a hefty price. Honesty has a hefty price. Truthfulness has even heftier price. Nobody wants to hear anything about the truth. So this is a whole ruckus about this girl is a lie. And I think that people, high school kids in further west, where people really fall for this crap, from what I see, there are always these kids that are oddballs that kind of feel when something is not authentic, when something is a lie. I can only imagine how they would react to this. Probably by ridiculing autism, by doing things that should not be done, but in automatic reaction. Because this kind of sentimental lunacy has obverse, and obverse is complete insensitivity. Because both are insensitivity. Being sentimental does not mean sensitive. This means desensitizing yourself for real, for what you should feel real emotions. Now you have then these people who will go on trolling on internet or ridiculing this girl to a absurd degree, and something of that we had with in New Zealand. We believe it or not, in our article on Kali Tribune we wrote about this, when internet troll goes live, how absolutely insensitive man acts, killing 50 people on account of memes, virtual reality, virtual problems, virtual reality. He is the obverse of the people who are cheering for this girl, for power of her autism, who take this as something that is good. And there we have it. Thank you for your attention. This was Branko Malic of Kali Tribune signing out.